I'd now like to invite Jen Allington up to read our reading this morning, which is by the Unitarian Universalist minister David S. Blanchard, and is entitled Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places.
Most of us look for love in only the most obvious places, and as a result, most of us come away disappointed. It's as if we are still grade school kids, counting Valentines as a measure of what matters. The love that matters is not typically the subject of sonnets or love songs. There can be love in being told we are wrong. There can be love in sharing a regret. There can be love in asking for help. There can be love in communicating hurt. There can be love in telling hard truths. Most of us find it painful to live at this level of love, but it can be there, even in these most unlikely places. It isn't the kind of love we've been promised in the fairy tales of princes and fairy godmothers, but it is the kind experienced by frogs and dwarfs. It's the sort of love that can bring us closer to finding the missing pieces of ourselves that we need to make us whole. Some of the most loving things I've ever experienced, I haven't been ready for, wasn't looking for, and nearly didn't recognize. A few of them I didn't want. But all of them have changed me, transformed some part of me, filled in a place that I didn't even know was empty. When the Valentine has been tucked away in a drawer, the candy eaten, the flowers faded and gone, there will be other legacies of love that will last as long as we do, because they have brought us to know an element of life, part feeling, part idea, part mystery, that once known is ours to keep.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning. Before I get started, I just want to say that no, this is not the story of how two Mormon missionaries came to my door in an attempt to convert me to Unitarian Universalism that ended up going terribly wrong. Sorry, attempt to convert me to Mormonism. That went terribly wrong. A conversion to Mormonism that went terribly wrong and ended up in Unitarian Universalism. I just say that because that's what I would have imagined if I saw the sermon title. Now, this story is something a little bit different. This is the story of a man I knew who changed the course of my life forever precisely because he was a Mormon. Let me set the scene for you. The year 2006. I was 21, a senior at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. My extremely extroverted personality had landed me a job as a resident advisor. I lived in a dorm that was designed specifically for students who were interested in music. It was called Just About Music, or JAM, J-A-M, and it would be an understatement to say that I loved this place. I lived there for 3 out of my 4 years at Cornell, and some of the people I met in JAM, or Jammies, as we called ourselves, are still my dearest friends to this day. While I was in college, JAM was simply the most important community I had. You see, JAM was where I first finally found courage to be who I was. It was there that I first came out as gay in my freshman year, and it was with other jammies that I helped restart the defunct Atheist and Agnostic Club at my school, of which by this point I had become president. I felt I found in JAM a group of people who were just like me, a group of people that accepted me, and with whom I felt totally comfortable. And so, it took me a little by surprise when I was going over the roster of students on my floor that year, and among my 36 residents was Evan. I didn't know a whole lot about Evan, but here's what I did know. He was a junior, but he was a year older than I was because he'd just returned from 2 years in Finland as a Mormon missionary. I was a little afraid of Evan. I was afraid of what would happen if he found out about these parts of my identity. How would a Mormon react to an atheist? How would a Mormon react to someone who was gay? But the truth is, I hadn't even really met somebody who was Mormon before. At least not that I was aware of. All I had to go on was what I heard about Mormons in the media. Now, remember, this was 10 years ago, and it's amazing how much the world has changed in terms of LGBTQ issues since back then. Back then, there was precisely one state where same-sex marriage was legal, this one. And all I knew as a young queer person was to be afraid of religious people. And so, I decided I'd just avoid Evan as much as I could. I'd have to interact with him. He was my resident after all, but otherwise I'd just avoid him. And I certainly wouldn't mention that I was a gay atheist. I'd just refrain from mentioning these things about myself and everything would be just fine. There was one problem with this plan. I hadn't counted on Evan being so darn nice. This floor of my residence hall was set up so that everyone who lived there had to pass by my room on the way to their own. I always had my door open, inviting students to stop by and say hello as they passed. But you know who stopped by the most? Evan, much to my chagrin. He'd come in and sit down and we'd talk about all sorts of things. Music, he was a lover of jazz, schoolwork, his trip to Finland. And whenever I organized an event on the floor, he'd be the first to show up, always happy to play a board game or listen to some music or watch a movie. And slowly, it began to dawn on me that maybe, just possibly, Evan and I were becoming friends. But still, I kept my guard up, and it wasn't until Thanksgiving where Evan and I had remained among a small group of students who hadn't gone home for the holiday. It wasn't until this Thanksgiving, 3 months into the semester, that Evan found out that I was gay, thanks to an offhand comment from another student. And so I braced myself for what was to come. I figured one of two things could happen. He could either challenge me or he could stop talking to me. But much to my surprise, neither of these things happened. Evan kept stopping by my room to talk every day. Except now we had this new subject, me being gay. He'd ask me questions, but not from a judgmental place, from a place of really trying to understand. I couldn't believe it. Where was the fire and brimstone I'd been expecting, the cold shoulder, the declaration that I was going to hell? Through the rest of the year, Evan and I just grew closer. It wasn't like he didn't struggle with my sexual orientation. He did. He definitely expressed difficulty with reconciling it with his Mormon faith. But he was honest and open with me about this struggle, and it was just that, a struggle, not a condemnation. And that's an important distinction. To struggle with something is to admit that what you previously thought might be wrong. Somehow, Evan found a way to open his heart to me despite his convictions. And that's something I think took real courage in humanity. And so it was a cold February night when I found myself in his room, this time, talking about our lives. He had been going through a difficult few weeks, and I'll never forget this moment because he paused. And he looked up to his wall, and on his wall he had a portrait, and it was a depiction of Jesus. And he said, "You know, if it wasn't for Christ, I don't think I could get through it." And in that moment, Evan showed me something I had never even considered before. He showed me the ways in which religion can help people. If this Mormon faith, the one that I thought was so terrible, had somehow had enough of an impact to help Evan, this now very dear friend of mine, then surely it couldn't be all bad, could it? Suddenly I was the one who was struggling. maybe I ought to give religion a try. Something had already begun to ruminate in my mind. You see, I was growing tired of the atheist and agnostic club. We were starting to feel like an anti-religion echo chamber. There was something missing in that group, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. We get together and talk about ideas, but we were not trying to be better people. We never comforted each other when we were in pain or challenged each other, because it wasn't a religion, it was a club. And so, from Evan's room, I went back to my own and onto Google. And I'm not sure what words exactly I typed in, but I do know that I ended up on the Unitarian Universalist Wikipedia page. And I remember sitting there at my computer in shock. There's a religion like this? Mind blown. I remember reading through the principles and thinking, hey, I pretty much believe this already. Before that day, I had heard about Unitarians in passing, but really I knew nothing about them. Reading this article was like somebody had dropped a religion out of thin air that it was exactly what I was looking for. A place where I didn't suddenly have to start believing in a higher power and denounce my atheism. A place where I could find that community I'd been lacking at my atheists and agnostics meeting. A place where my whole self would be accepted. If Unitarian Universalists have conversion experiences, then this was certainly mine. Upon reading the holy gospel, the wonderful good news of Unitarian Universalism on a Wikipedia page on the internet in my dorm room, I right then and there professed my faith. There was nothing supernatural about it, just a remarkable coming together of events that led me there. And so that Sunday, I got up far too early for a college student and walked half an hour in the upstate New York winter, which is worse than Boston, by the way, to my very first service at a Unitarian Universalist church. And my life has never been the same. In Unitarian Universalism, I have found a faith that has nurtured me and challenged me and inspired me and disappointed me. A faith that has allowed me to grow and to change my views. A faith that, whether I like it or not, compels me to honor the inherent worth and dignity of every person, including Mormons like my friend Evan. A faith that, in a strange way, has some distinct similarities to Mormonism. Both Unitarian Universalism and the Mormon Church are religions with roots in Christianity, but significant differences in theology that changed when they were in the United States, giving both a fairly unique American flavor to them. Both are minority faiths, and both have had the distinction of being called cults. Maybe Evan and I weren't so different after all. A few months after this conversion experience, after quietly attending the Unitarian Universalist church on my own, I was out for dinner with some friends, including Evan, and the topic of religion came up, and I told him, with some reservation, that I'd started going to the UU church. And you know what he said? He said, "That's so great. God doesn't care what house you worship in. I'm just happy you found a church that works for you." Now, I could have been upset. I certainly didn't believe in God. But there was such an authenticity to what he said. He was genuinely happy that I had found a faith to work for me. I don't think for a moment Evan ever expected me to change who I was and become a Mormon. And what really gets to me about this, what really gets to me, is that I don't know if I could, as myself today, after having been a Unitarian Universalist for 10 years, I don't know if I could have the same response if a friend of mine told me that my UU faith had led them to become a Mormon. And so I keep thinking, why can't I do this? I come from a faith that believes in the freedom of belief. From a faith that holds religious pluralism as one of our highest values. Me, who converted to Unitarian Universalism because of a Mormon. I would still feel uncomfortable if our roles had been reversed. You may have seen this past week the Pew Research graph that's been going around Facebook. It shows religious tradition on one side and how many members of each tradition lean Democrat and how many lean Republican. And at the very, very top of the graph is the Mormon Church. They are the most Republican-leaning religious tradition in the United States that was surveyed, with 70% leaning Republican and 19% leaning Democrat. Now, if you scroll through the list, past the Southern Baptists, past the Catholics, past the nuns, that's N-O-N-E-S, nuns, those who don't claim any religious tradition, past the Jews, the Muslims, the Hindus, the Buddhists, past the agnostics and the atheists, you will finally get towards the bottom of the list to the Unitarian Universalists. We're third from the bottom with 84% leaning Democrat and 14% leaning Republican. And what was surprising to me about this was that we are more homogenous in our political views with our 84% Democrat leanings than the Mormons are. They only lean 70% Republican. I thought this was interesting. The other thing that this graph shows, however, is that despite these leanings of both of these faith traditions, neither is a monolithic group. Because each group, Mormons and Unitarians and every Unitarian Universalist and every other in between, are made up of individuals. And it's so easy to take someone from a group and automatically make all of these assumptions about them, and sometimes, like I did with Evan, it can be easy to assume the worst about them. But our Unitarian Universalist faith and this church challenge us to do more than that. It challenges us to seek the truth in love. It challenges us to seek justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. It challenges us to be our best selves, even when it's hard. And so for me, I am thankful that I met Evan, who, despite my attempts to avoid him, kept stopping by my room. And who, despite our differences, which seemed insurmountable to me, he opened his heart to try to understand. He taught me more about being a person of faith than anyone I ever met, and maybe he even taught me more about being a UU. And so I challenge you to open your heart just a little bit to people you don't understand, or to people you don't agree with, or to people that you're afraid of, because you might be surprised by how they could change your life. May it be so.